Settle in with a cup of tea and your imagination. This is Detective Duo, where every clue finds its place, just as Tommy and Tuppence would have insisted. Don't forget to subscribe and tell us where in the world you're joining from. The morning had begun with nothing more sinister than burnt toast. Tuppence blamed Tommy, Tommy blamed the new electric toaster, and the argument had reached the brink of domestic warfare when the post arrived to play referee. Bills, circulars, and an invitation from your Aunt Myra to something called a legacy lunch, Tuppence announced, riffling through the stack. Oh, and this, rather official looking. She held up a brown envelope stamped in red, Confidential, MI6 Archives. The words gave the quiet sitting room a small electric tremor. Tommy looked up from buttering the unburnt edge of his toast. Good heavens, it's probably a mistake. The government doesn't confide in retired adventurers over breakfast. Retired? Tuppence arched an eyebrow. You make us sound like a pair of moth-eaten armchairs. The envelope, unsealed but heavy, exhaled a faint odour of dust and long filing cabinets. Inside lay a single typed sheet, unsigned and faintly smudged. The Shanghai Mission, 1927. They are closing the files, and one name must be buried again. There was nothing else, no signature, no address, only a Wokingham sub-office postmark in the corner. Tuppence reread the message twice, her pulse quickening. The Shanghai Mission, she murmured. Wasn't that something to do with trade negotiations or spies or possibly both? Tommy reached for the letter, scanning it with the frown of a man sifting through half-forgotten corridors of memory. If it was before my time. Shanghai was a hornet's nest in the 20s, but this is absurd. Someone's clearly posted it to the wrong address. Or the right one, she countered. Perhaps they wanted it to come to us. Her eyes were bright. She had that unmistakable glint that foretold trouble disguised as adventure. Tommy recognized it instantly and groaned. Now, Tuppence, before you construct a grand conspiracy involving double agents and coded teapots, may I remind you we have luncheon with the Winthrops. Cancelled, she said promptly. On medical grounds. I feel a sudden attack of curiosity. Tommy sighed, folding his napkin like a man resigned to fate. Very well, but after breakfast, not before. By 11 o'clock their table was cleared, the toast forgotten, and Tuppence had established headquarters at her writing desk. She was examining the envelope with a magnifying glass borrowed from Tommy's toolkit. No fingerprints, at least none visible. But notice this, she said, tapping the corner. The postmark isn't recent. It's dated last Friday, yet it arrived only today. Tommy leaned against the mantel, pipe in hand. So either the Royal Mail has grown contemplative or someone held it back. Exactly. She turned the letter over and found faint indentations, as though another sheet had been written upon it. Rubbing lightly with a pencil, words began to emerge. If you receive this, burn it. They will come for it first. For a moment, neither spoke. The clock on the sideboard ticked with too much clarity. Then Tommy said, quietly, You know, I might start believing you're coded teapots after all. Thank you, said Tuppence primly. It's nice to be taken seriously before the danger arrives. At 12:30, the Beresfords' housekeeper Alice entered to announce luncheon. When she left, the letter lay neatly beside the teapot. 10 minutes later, it was gone. Tuppence stood frozen, her hand on the sugar bowl. Tommy, did you move it? He looked up from carving the cold beef. Move what? The letter. It was right here. A thorough search followed, under trays, between newspapers, even in the wastepaper basket, but the brown envelope had vanished as completely as a conjurer's rabbit. Tommy checked the front door. No callers since the milkman. The window's been open, though. Could have blown off the table. Tuppence gave him a long, patient stare. A confidential MI6 document doesn't flutter out for a stroll. Someone took it. Her tone was calm, but her pulse wasn't. She noticed then a thin film of dust disturbed along the sideboard, a faint mark where the envelope had rested, and beside it, the tiniest of smudges. Look, she said. Fingerprints, or at least glove marks. Someone wearing smooth leather. Housebreakers in broad daylight? Nonsense. But Tommy's glance toward the window was wary. They crossed to the sill. Below, the street hummed with London's lunchtime activity, buses, bicycles, and the crisp click of heels on pavement. Nothing suspicious except perhaps a parked van with Rogers & Son domestic repairs painted on the side. The driver sat smoking, his cap pulled low. Tuppence noted the registration number out of habit. Even plumbers don't sit perfectly still for 20 minutes, she murmured. Could be our man, Tommy agreed, or he's merely digesting his sandwiches. They withdrew from the window. By tea time, curiosity had replaced alarm. Tuppence's notebook already bore headings like possible motives and Shanghai connections. She rang up an old acquaintance in the Foreign Office only to find his number disconnected. Vanished officials, vanishing letters, she mused. Either someone's tidying up history, or we've stumbled into the most exciting afternoon since the Blitz. Tommy refilled her cup. You realize, of course, if this is official business, poking our noses in could land us before a tribunal. Oh, darling, she said sweetly, I never could resist a tribunal. The chairs are so uncomfortable it keeps one awake. He smiled despite himself. Where do we start? Wokingham, she said instantly. That's where the postmark came from. If someone meant the letter to reach us, we'll find the trail there. And if it was truly misdelivered, then we'll apologize, after we know what we shouldn't have read. Tommy folded the newspaper. You do realize I was looking forward to an uneventful week. I'm sure you were, she said cheerfully, but the universe clearly disagrees. That evening, as dusk softened the rooftops, Tommy went down to post a few letters. The Rogers & Son van was gone, but a small torn scrap of brown paper fluttered near the curb. He bent to pick it up. On its surface, faint but unmistakable, was the red imprint, Confidential, MI6 Archives. He brought it upstairs, placing it silently before Tuppence, who was cataloguing theories by candlelight. Her eyes met his. Then it wasn't a mistake. No, he said. It was a message, and whoever sent it knows exactly where we live. Tuppence blew out the candle, the room falling into soft twilight. Then I suppose, she said quietly, we'd better find out what happened in Shanghai before someone decides to tidy us away too. The clock struck 8, precise as a warning. Outside, the city went on eating, laughing, living, unaware that a forgotten file from a faraway mission had just reopened in a small, lamp-lit sitting room in South Audley Mansions. And thus, with a vanished letter and a spark of curiosity, the Shanghai trail began once more. It was nearly 4:30 when the doorbell rang, that particular tone, long and insistent, that signalled a caller who considered himself more important than the occasion warranted. Tuppence, halfway through trimming a rose stem for the mantel vase, glanced up. "Tommy," she called, "did you invite anyone for tea, or has fate decided to deliver another mystery?" Tommy, behind the newspaper, replied absently, "If it's the gas company, tell them we've already paid. If it's adventure, tell it to come back in the morning." She went to answer, brushing petals from her skirt. When she opened the door, the man on the threshold drew her breath for a second. Tall, distinguished, his hair silver at the temples, but his eyes anxious and darting like a man who'd misplaced something more important than his keys. "Mrs. Beresford?" he asked. "Forgive the intrusion. Wonder if your husband might remember me." Tuppence took in the Savile Row cut of his overcoat, the polished walking stick, the faint trace of tobacco mixed with expensive soap. Something about him stirred memory, the kind of man Tommy used to salute but never quite trust. "Of course," she said with her brightest smile. "Come in. He's just behind the newspaper pretending it's a shield." When Tommy appeared, his expression flickered from surprise to disbelief. "Good Lord. Sir Gerald Finlay?" "The same," the visitor said lightly, though his voice carried an odd brittleness. "Still in London, I see. You've done well for yourself, Beresford. Domestic peace suits you." "Peace," Tuppence murmured, "is a fragile illusion. Won't you sit?" Sir Gerald took the armchair nearest the window, but not before glancing outside as though ensuring no one had followed him. Tuppence noticed that gesture, the quick flicker of the eyes, the practised smile a heartbeat late. Tommy fetched the tea tray. "To what do we owe this unexpected honour? You left intelligence years ago, didn't you?" "So did you," said Finlay dryly. "And yet, here we are, both ghosts from a service that never quite buries its dead." He reached for a biscuit, hesitated and replaced it. "I suppose you've already had correspondence." Tuppence's tone was casual. "If you mean the letter marked confidential, MI6 Archives, yes. A charming surprise over breakfast. I was hoping for a crossword clue." Finlay's fingers tightened on his walking stick. Then you did open it. We're curious creatures, Tuppence said sweetly, but it vanished soon after. Stolen, I think. Do you happen to know why someone would want it? He looked from her to Tommy and back again. That letter shouldn't have been sent. The Shanghai affair was closed permanently. If anyone's reopening it... He stopped himself and gave a short laugh that didn't reach his eyes. Well, the past shouldn't surface now. Meaning? Tommy asked. Finlay shook his head. Loose talk, Beresford, pay no attention. You were good officers once. Leave the matter alone. It's not safe. That final word hung in the air like a faint echo of gunfire. Tuppence poured more tea, her movements unhurried. You'll forgive me, Sir Gerald, but I've never liked being told what not to do. It usually guarantees I'll do precisely that. He smiled faintly. Still as reckless as ever. I remember you both. Shanghai, if you must know, was chaos. Betrayals, double agents, money vanishing under diplomatic seals. I spent years burying it properly. And yet, Tommy said, it seems to have sent us a postcard. Finlay rose abruptly, tugging on his gloves. Forget it. Consider my visit a courtesy, a warning if you prefer, and do keep your telephone off the hook for a day or two. Tuppence frowned. Our telephone? Why? He offered no answer. Goodbye, Mrs. Beresford. Tommy. The front door closed behind him with a decisive thud. For several seconds neither spoke. Then Tuppence said softly, Well, that was interesting. You realise he didn't deny knowing about the letter, only regretted that we'd seen it. Tommy nodded slowly. He's frightened. I haven't seen Finlay look like that since Dunkirk. Which means, said Tuppence, setting down her cup, that whatever's hiding under the label Shanghai Mission isn't just dust and paper. Evening deepened. The Beresfords dined quietly, though neither tasted much of the food. Tuppence kept glancing at the telephone as if expecting it to ring. At 9, she decided to test the line. Operator, this is South Audley Mansions, de Bourse, number 34. Could you connect me to Wokingham sub-office, please? A crackle answered her, followed by an unnerving silence. Then a faint click and the line went dead. She replaced the receiver. Tommy, it's cut off. He came from the sitting room, pipe in hand. Out of order? No, cut. Someone's tampered with it. He examined the wire near the skirting board. The insulation had been prized back, neatly, surgically. Professional work, he muttered. Whoever wanted us isolated didn't waste time. Tuppence straightened. First the letter, now the telephone. I suppose we'll find the milk's been poisoned next. Let's hope not. I've already drunk mine. Her eyes sparked with that familiar mix of mischief and resolve. Then, my dear husband, we're in it again. Tommy gave a resigned chuckle. I rather suspected that when you started quoting unfinished files at breakfast. Precisely, she said. Nothing irritates me more than an unfinished file. Later, as they prepared for bed, the atmosphere in the flat seemed subtly changed, still, alert, as though listening. From the street below came the faint purr of a car engine, lingering longer than necessary, then fading into distance. Tommy paused by the window. Finlay said not to use the telephone. Perhaps he knew this would happen. Tuppence brushed her hair before the mirror, her reflection calm but her eyes bright. He also said Shanghai shouldn't surface now, which means it's already started to. You intend to follow it, then? Of course, she said lightly. You can't expect me to ignore a puzzle that walks straight into our drawing room in polished shoes. Tommy smiled, a mixture of affection and dread. All right, my dear, but next time the past pays a visit, I'd appreciate 24 hours' notice. She laughed softly, turning down the lamp. The past never writes ahead, darling. It just arrives, uninvited, inconvenient, and far too interesting to turn away. Outside, London's hum softened into sleep, but in one small corner of South Audley Mansions, 2 familiar figures sat awake, facing a new and invisible game, one whose first move had already been made. The doorman at the Albany Club had aged with all the dignity of a well-trained butler. He saluted Tommy with the faintest flicker of recognition and a touch of frost in his tone. "Good afternoon, Mr. Beresford. It's been quite a while." "Since the war," said Tommy cheerfully, handing over his hat and gloves, though I see the portraits still glare at newcomers the same way. Inside, the club was as it had always been, upholstered silence broken only by the gentle rustle of newspapers and the discreet clearing of throats. Men read the Times as if national stability depended upon it. A scent of old tobacco and polished oak hovered in the air, timeless and faintly melancholy. Tuppence had insisted he come alone. "You'll get more gossip without me there," she'd said that morning, pouring coffee with military precision. Men loosen their tongues for other men, or at least for someone who used to chase spies rather than recipes. So here he was, back among the relics of empire and habit, scanning faces for a ghost. He had ordered nothing more dangerous than a ginger ale when it happened. Across the room, framed in the leaded glass of the window, he caught sight of a man stepping off the pavement outside, tall, lean, his posture unmistakably military. Tommy's glass halted mid-air. The face was older, thinner, but still possessed that same angular grace he remembered from long-ago missions. Miles Renfrew, the man who'd supposedly died in a transport explosion off Malta in 41. Tommy blinked, half expecting the vision to vanish, but the man was real, and looking directly at him through the window, as if gauging the distance between memory and danger. Then Renfrew turned sharply and walked away. Without a second thought, Tommy rose, upsetting the ginger ale. "Excuse me," he muttered to the startled waiter and hurried out. The pavement outside was busy with late afternoon traffic, clerks, taxis, and the muffled hum of city life. But of Renfrew there was no trace, only a drifting whiff of cigarette smoke and the sense of being watched from somewhere unseen. Tommy's pulse beat fast. The past, it seemed, was no longer sleeping. He retraced his steps to the doorway, irritated with himself for losing the man. As he turned to re-enter the club, a waiter intercepted him, the same one who'd served the ginger ale. "Beg pardon, sir," the man said nervously. "Gentleman dropped this. Said it might concern you." He held out a folded napkin. On the inside, scrawled in pencil, "Meet me where the red lanterns never died." Tommy's fingers tightened around it. The handwriting was hurried but distinctive, the looping R unmistakably Renfrew's. He glanced up, ready to question the waiter further, but the man had already slipped back inside, tray clutched like a shield. Back home in South Audley Mansions, Tuppence listened to his account with barely concealed delight. "Renfrew," she exclaimed. "Dead heroes don't usually send luncheon invitations. What a pity I wasn't there. I might have made him trip over his conscience." Tommy handed her the napkin. "That's all he left. I'd say it's either a trap or a plea for help." She read the words aloud, tasting them. "Where the red lanterns never died. Romantic, if you like riddles. It must refer to somewhere in Soho. Chinatown, perhaps?" "Exactly what I thought. The Lotus Room was in that quarter, remember? Old Mrs. Lynn's tea shop, headquarters for half the small-scale intelligence swaps before the war." Tuppence's eyes gleamed. "Where you and Renfrew used to meet over jasmine tea while pretending to discuss import licenses. Oh, yes, I remember your letters, full of code names and complaints about the buns." "Those buns," Tommy said with feeling, "were more dangerous than half the enemy operatives. But you're right. If any red lanterns ever burned eternal, it would be there." By dusk, they were in Soho. The streets were alive with movement, the cry of vendors, neon reflections in puddles, the mingled scent of fried noodles and perfume. Old Chinatown had changed, but not entirely. It still pulsed with secrets wrapped in steam. They found the address easily enough. The Lotus Room sign was faded, its paint peeling, but a dim glow spilled through the front windows. A brass bell jingled as they entered. The interior smelled of sandalwood and age. Shelves lined with porcelain jars and silk fans gave the illusion of an antique shop, but the arrangement was too careful, too staged. Behind the counter, a woman turned from polishing a teapot. She was small, elegant, her hair streaked with silver, her eyes alert as a cat's. "Mr. and Mrs. Beresford," she said softly, with the faintest Chinese accent. "It has been a long time." Tuppence blinked. "Mrs. Lynn, you remember us?" "How could I forget? You once hid a message in a tin of gunpowder tea. Most original." Tommy smiled, uneasy. "We were told to meet someone here, perhaps an old friend." Mrs. Lynn nodded toward the back room. "There are no red lanterns now, but some ghosts still burn. I have something you should see." She led them through a curtain into a smaller room, dimly lit by a single lamp. On the wall hung a framed photograph, sepia, faded, and cracked at the edges. It showed a group of men and women in tropical uniforms standing before a building marked British Consulate, Shanghai, 1927, and among them, unmistakably, were Tommy Beresford and a man who looked exactly like him. Tuppence stepped closer. "Good heavens, that's you." Tommy frowned. "It can't be. I never served in Shanghai." Mrs. Lin tapped the glass gently. "The lady there," she said, pointing to a poised figure in a cheongsam, "was called Mrs. Vale. She worked with the mission. You see her resemblance?" Tuppence gasped. The woman could have been her twin. "Identical," she whispered. "Same eyes, same chin." Mrs. Lin smiled faintly. "Some say fate repeats its faces." On the back of the photograph, scrawled in ink, was a line of Chinese characters. Mrs. Lin translated quietly. Only one came home. Tommy and Tuppence exchanged a look, that rare moment when even their humour faltered. Outside, the streetlight flickered, casting red reflections on the shop window. As they left, Tommy felt the unmistakable prickle of being watched. Across the road, a man in a dark overcoat pretended to read a newspaper upside down. He tugged Tuppence's arm. "Let's walk." They turned the corner quickly. Behind them came the faint scrape of footsteps, following for half a block before stopping. When Tommy risked a glance back, the man had vanished. At the taxi rank, Tuppence exhaled slowly. "Well, darling, it seems the red lanterns haven't quite gone out after all." Tommy looked at her, still shaken by the photograph. "If Renfrew's alive, he's in deeper than we thought. And if that woman, Mrs. Vale, was truly your double," Tuppence smiled, though her eyes were far away. "Then perhaps," she said softly, "I've been chasing my own reflection through someone else's secrets." As the taxi pulled away, the glow from the shop window dimmed, and the old red lantern flickered once, a heartbeat of light in the darkening Soho street. Tommy knew then that the game had begun in earnest, and that someone, somewhere, had just moved the next piece. "Are we really meeting a spy at Charing Cross?" Tuppence asked, fastening her gloves with exaggerated care. "Or is this one of your more colourful lunch appointments?" Tommy smiled faintly as he adjusted his hat. "If it goes according to plan, we'll receive classified documents, uncover treason, and avoid being arrested. So, better than most of my lunches." She gave a theatrical sigh. "Splendid. I'll bring the sandwiches." But despite the lightness of their words, both felt the tight coil of tension beneath. The city outside was restless. Horns, footsteps, the sharp click of heels echoing off the pavements. Somewhere among the noise, danger was quietly threading its way toward them. The rendezvous point had been chosen for its anonymity. Charing Cross was always busy enough to swallow secrets. Commuters rushing to trains, soldiers home on leave, porters shouting over the hiss of steam. Tommy had arranged to meet the archivist at platform 4, under the clock. The man was already there when they arrived, a thin figure in a dark overcoat, cap pulled low, spectacles glinting beneath the station lights. His eyes darted like those of someone perpetually expecting the wrong hand on his shoulder. "Mr. Beresford," he murmured when Tommy approached. "Yes, this is my wife." The archivist's nod was brief, distracted. "We mustn't talk long. They've been clearing the old files. Anything connected with Shanghai or the Mandarin vanished or locked away under level red." "Which is where you come in," said Tuppence quietly. He gave a nervous smile. "I don't have long before they notice what's missing, but I couldn't destroy history. Some things deserve witnesses." He reached into his briefcase and withdrew a single brown folder tied with string. Across the top, stamped in fading red ink, "Mandarin, eyes only." Tuppence's breath caught. So it does exist. The archivist hesitated. "You'll want to read it somewhere private. It contains telegrams, lists of names, coded transactions. Gold shipments, yes, but also weapons. The Mandarin wasn't just laundering funds, he was arming factions across Asia, all under diplomatic cover." Tommy's expression hardened. "Names?" The man nodded. "Many, including British ones." He looked around suddenly, his face draining of colour. "We shouldn't be seen together." Before either Beresford could react, a rush of movement swept through the crowd. A porter shouted as a train thundered in, its brakes screaming. The archivist flinched, his gaze jerking toward the platform edge. A hand, gloved, deliberate, pushed him from behind. There was a cry, the dull thud of impact, and the man disappeared beneath the iron wheels. For one suspended second, everything froze. The hiss of steam, the metallic groan, the horrified gasp of the crowd. Then the noise erupted. Shouts, whistles, confusion. Tuppence grabbed Tommy's arm, her face white. "Tommy!" He pulled her back against the wall as people surged forward. "We have to go. Now." "But the file—" He held it up, the brown folder clenched tight in his hand. "He gave it to me before. He must have known." They pushed through the gathering crowd, slipping out through a side corridor before the police sealed the platform. The sound of whistles echoed after them as they disappeared into the warren of London's back streets. They didn't speak until they reached the quiet refuge of a tea shop near St. Martin's Lane. Tuppence sat at a corner table, still pale but composed, while Tommy spread the file between them. "Good heavens," she whispered. "He was murdered right in front of us." Tommy's jaw tightened. And whoever did it knew exactly when and where to find him. That wasn't random. It was a message. He untied the string. Inside were several thin sheets of onion skin paper, stamped with the Foreign Office crest. The telegrams were concise, cold, the language of covert logistics. From Consulate Shanghai to Foreign Office, London Shipment 7 complete. Delivery confirmed via diplomatic pouch. Funds transferred to Mandarin account. Another dated 3 weeks later. From MR delay on convoy east. Alternative buyer arranged. Gold and munitions secured. Tuppence's eyes widened. MR. Miles Renfrew. Tommy scanned further. "There's more. Look, this one is dated November 1942. She frowned. "But Renfrew was reported dead in 41. "Exactly," said Tommy grimly. "Either his ghost was dictating telegrams, or he staged his own death." He turned the next page. Several names were listed under Mandarin operatives. British correspondents. Finlay. MRLV erased. And one more name circled in red pencil. Pending replacement contact TB. Tuppence felt the bottom drop out of her stomach. "TB. You." He met her gaze. "Which means they intended to bring me into it, or frame me." She shook her head. "But why? You left intelligence years ago." "Because I was convenient," he said slowly. "Trusted, unquestioned. If someone needed to move gold or arms through diplomatic channels without drawing suspicion, I'd have been the perfect ghost to hang it on." Tuppence pressed a hand to her forehead. Finlay must have realized. That's why he warned us off, and why he died before finishing his sentence. Tommy's voice was low. "Renfrew's alive. He's taken the Mandarin's place. He's clearing every trace of the old operation, starting with those who knew." They stared at each other as the realization settled like dust. When they left the tea shop, London's afternoon had turned sharp and grey. The street sounds seemed too loud now, each footstep behind them suspicious. Tommy tucked the file under his arm. "We'll make a copy and hide the original. Too valuable to keep in one place." Tuppence nodded. "Home first, then we'll decide who we can trust." But as they neared South Audley Mansions, Tommy's instincts stirred. A black motor car stood parked across the street, engine idling. Its windows were darkened. "Keep walking," he murmured. "Don't look back." They passed the car without incident, yet when Tommy glanced from the corner of his eye, he saw the driver's silhouette, motionless, watching. Upstairs, the flat felt unnaturally still. Tuppence closed the curtains at once. "We can't stay long." Tommy set the file on the table. "Let's see what else is in here before they take their next move." The last telegram was handwritten, unlike the others. Its edges were charred as though rescued from fire. "To GF. You failed to contain the leak. Orders: eliminate all who possess knowledge of the gold fund. Priority target: Beresford." Tuppence exhaled. "They've made it official. You're next on the list." Tommy gave a short laugh. "At least it's nice to be wanted." "Tommy." He reached across, touching her hand. "I've been in this game long enough to know one thing. When people start cleaning house, they always miss a spot. We'll find that spot." That night, while the city hummed below, they copied every page by hand, burning the edges of each duplicate to mimic age. Tuppence's handwriting was neat, precise, her expression unreadable. "Who do we trust with the copies?" she asked finally. "No one yet," said Tommy. "Finlay's dead, the archivist's gone, and our ghost friend Renfrew is running the show. Until we know who's still loyal, it stays between us." She nodded, though her eyes strayed toward the window where the streetlights shimmered on wet pavement. What if Renfrew isn't working alone? What if the Mandarin's network is still here, in London? Tommy smiled faintly. Then he's chosen the wrong city. London may tolerate corruption, but it never forgives ghosts. It was nearly midnight when they finally locked the file away in a hollow section behind the bookshelf. The act felt both futile and defiant, like hiding a candle in a hurricane. Tuppence poured brandy for them both. "You know," she said, "I keep thinking of that poor archivist. He risked his life for these papers." Tommy nodded. "And someone made sure he never talked again. That means there's still something in these pages they can't afford us to see." She frowned. "Then we've missed it." He looked at her sharply. "What do you mean?" "Every clue so far has had a pattern. Music, initials, repetition. What if one of these telegrams hides another cipher?" They spread the pages out again. Tuppence's eyes flicked across them, tracing the phrasing, the sequence of dates. Then she stopped. "Here, look at the signatures. The first 5 are signed M.R., but the 6th, see? M.R.N. That's not an accident." Tommy leaned closer. "Renfrew didn't sign like that before." "Exactly. And the date, after his supposed death. Whoever wrote it wanted us to notice. It's his way of saying he's alive." Tommy straightened, his voice low. "And orchestrating everything. He must have killed Finlay, arranged the archivist's death, and now he's after us." She smiled faintly, though there was no humour in it. "Well, at least we've confirmed our haunting has a name." A sudden knock at the door shattered the silence. They froze. Tommy motioned Tuppence behind the desk, moving quietly toward the entrance. "Who is it?" A pause, then a calm voice. "Telegram delivery for Mr. Beresford." Tommy exchanged a glance with Tuppence. "At midnight?" he muttered. He opened the door an inch, the chain still fastened. A boy stood there, cap pulled low, a yellow envelope in his hand. "Message, sir." Tommy took it through the gap and shut the door quickly. Tuppence hovered near. "What does it say?" He unfolded the slip. The words were typewritten, impersonal. "You have something that does not belong to you. Return the file or join Finlay." There was no signature, only a small printed symbol in the corner, a stylized crane. Tuppence's breath caught. "The same as the pendant." Tommy crumpled the paper slowly. "Then we're close, Tuppence, close enough to frighten them." He tossed the message into the fire, watching the flames devour the paper. She met his gaze steadily. "And if they come for us next?" He smiled faintly, the old spark of humour glinting through the tension. "Then, my dear girl, let's make sure they regret knocking." Outside, a car engine started in the street below. Somewhere in the distance, Big Ben struck one, each chime a warning, a countdown, and a promise that the Mandarin's secret was no longer hidden. "Are you sure you want to do this?" Tommy asked quietly, his gloved hands steady on the steering wheel. "Of course not," Tuppence replied briskly. "That's why I insist on doing it." The car purred through the sleeping city, its headlights slicing through the thickening mist. London after midnight had a peculiar stillness, the sort that made you aware of every echo. Somewhere in the distance a barge horn moaned along the river, a sound ancient and melancholy. On Tuppence's lap rested a small leather case, inside which lay the Mandarin file, or rather, the copy they had made. The original was hidden at South Audley Mansions behind the false panel in the bookcase. Tonight's exchange, if it went as planned, would prove whether Mei Zhao's message had been a lifeline or a trap. The meeting place was a cargo barge moored off the south bank, near a disused dock where cranes loomed like skeletons in the fog. The Thames lapped softly against the hulls, its surface silvered by the faint light of lamps. "Picturesque," Tuppence murmured, pulling her coat closer. "If we die here, I hope someone paints it properly." Tommy smiled grimly. "That's the spirit." A figure was waiting by the gangplank, small, graceful, wrapped in a dark shawl. Mei Zhao's eyes gleamed in the dim light. "You came," she said softly. "I wasn't sure." "You said you had something more," said Tommy. "Information worth risking a walk on the river at midnight." Her gaze flickered to the leather case in Tuppence's hands. "He will come for that. He always does. But you must be careful. Renfrew plays both sides now." "Then it's time we met properly," said Tuppence. Majow nodded toward the barge. He insisted on neutral ground. Inside, the cabin at the stern. Be cautious. He never travels alone. She melted into the mist as they crossed the narrow gangway. The air smelled of tar, rope, and the slow breathing of the river. A single lamp burned by the cabin door. Inside, the space was cramped and dimly lit. A table, 2 chairs, and the faint scent of tobacco. Renfrew entered without sound. He was taller than Tommy remembered, his dark hair streaked with silver, his face lean and handsome in a way that suggested too much charm and too little conscience. His voice, when it came, was smooth as lacquer. "Well," he said, "the famous Beresfords, still solving puzzles that should have stayed unsolved." "Still manufacturing them, I see," said Tommy. Renfrew smiled, setting his gloves on the table. "Let's not be unkind. I've simply made a career out of survival." "Most men who die in 1941 don't get to brag about that," said Tuppence. He inclined his head. "Ah, yes, the small matter of my death. Shanghai was chaos. Identities were fluid, loyalties complicated. It seemed convenient to let mine drown." "And resurface as what?" asked Tommy. "A blackmailer? A merchant of stolen state secrets?" Renfrew's eyes glinted. "A realist. The Mandarin's files are worth a fortune. Do you have any idea what certain governments would pay for proof that British agents armed both sides of a colonial war?" He leaned forward. "You could join me, you know. You've always been cleverer than the bureaucrats who used you. Why not finally get paid for it?" Tuppence smiled sweetly. "Tempting, but we've already promised to sell our souls to the Home Office. They offered us a lovely certificate." Renfrew laughed, a low, rich sound that didn't reach his eyes. "Still the wit, Mrs. Beresford. You haven't changed." "No," she said softly. "But you have. You've grown a scar." For the first time, he blinked. "What?" She tilted her head. "Left temple, just under the hairline. You used to cover it with powder. You told the girl at the Lotus Room it came from a knife fight in Tsingtao. But it wasn't. It was from that factory raid in 39, wasn't it? The one where you abandoned your own men." His composure wavered, just slightly. "You've been thorough." "I'm married to a man who files his socks by colour," she said. "We do thorough very well." Tommy placed the leather case on the table. "Here it is, the Mandarin file. Take it, and tell us who's pulling your strings now." Renfrew smiled. "Ah, no, I don't answer questions anymore. I ask them." He reached for the case, and Tommy's hand shot out, producing the revolver from his coat pocket. "Not yet," said Tommy evenly. Renfrew's expression shifted from amusement to faint admiration. "You always were the loyal one. Tell me, is that loaded or just decorative?" Tommy met his gaze. "Why don't you find out?" For a heartbeat, the cabin was silent except for the creak of the river. Then Renfrew laughed again. "You're bluffing. You were never the type to shoot a man over paperwork." "Paperwork that gets people killed," said Tuppence sharply. "Or didn't you notice the explosion that used to be Finley?" Something flickered in his eyes, guilt perhaps, or pride. "Finley was weak. He tried to trade both sides. I simply removed an unstable element." "You murdered him," said Tuppence. He shrugged. "War is an untidy business. So is peace." Tommy's grip tightened on the revolver. "Last chance, Renfrew. Who else is involved?" Renfrew's tone turned mocking. "You think I'm the villain? The Mandarin is an office, not a man. Someone will always wear the mask. Kill me, and another will step in. The network runs deeper than either of you can imagine." He took a slow step forward. "But I do admire the courage, Beresford. Truly. You almost make me regret what happens next." A sound broke the tension, the faint creak of a plank outside. Renfrew's head turned instinctively. Tuppence's voice sliced through the air. "Don't bother, Renfrew. You'll find your escape routes rather crowded." From the doorway a figure appeared, one of Renfrew's own men, dressed in black, revolver drawn. But his eyes weren't on Tommy. They were on Renfrew. "Orders," he said curtly. "You've been replaced." Renfrew's face registered disbelief. "What?" The man lifted his weapon. "You talk too much." The shot exploded through the cabin. The lamp shattered, plunging them into chaos. Tuppence cried out as Tommy pulled her down behind the table. Another shot answered, deafening in the confined space. Through the smoke, Renfrew staggered, clutching his shoulder. His assailant aimed again, but the boat lurched suddenly, struck by the river's current. The man stumbled, his bullet striking the wall instead. Tommy seized the moment, lunging forward and swinging the butt of his revolver. It connected with the man's jaw. He crumpled to the floor. Renfrew reeled toward the door, blood darkening his coat. "Fools, all of you," he gasped. "You don't understand. He's watching everything." Then, before anyone could move, he threw himself out onto the deck. "Tommy!" shouted Tuppence, scrambling after him. They burst out into the night air just in time to see Renfrew stumble against the railing. The fog closed around him, thick and glowing faintly from the city lights beyond. "Renfrew!" Tommy shouted. He turned once, his face pale, water glinting on his cheek. "The Mandarin lives," he rasped, and then he fell backward into the river. The splash was swallowed instantly by the tide. They searched with lanterns, shouting into the mist, but the river offered no answer. Only ripples, widening, then vanishing as if nothing had disturbed it. When they returned to the cabin, the man in black had disappeared, vanished like smoke, leaving only a few drops of blood and the faint smell of cordite. The leather case was gone. Tuppence stared at the empty table, disbelief in her voice. It was right here. Tommy's expression was grim. They took it in the confusion. She sank into the chair, pressing her hands to her temples. "So after all that, after Finlay, the archivist, everything, it's vanished again." He knelt beside her. "We've lost a file, not the truth. We still have our copy, our notes, and Renfrew's words. He's watching everything. That means the Mandarin's successor is still active." She gave a shaky laugh. "Comforting. It means he hasn't retired." Tommy rose, glancing around the cabin. "Let's go. We've stayed too long. The police will be drawn by the shots, and I'd rather not explain why we're having midnight duels on government property." They made their way back up the gangplank as the fog thickened, muffling the sound of their footsteps. The river gleamed faintly, carrying secrets away toward the sea. Behind them, the barge swayed gently, the broken lamp swinging like a pendulum. Tuppence stopped halfway across the dock, turning to look back. "Do you think he's dead this time?" Tommy hesitated. "If he isn't, the Thames will have to answer for it." She nodded, though her gaze lingered on the dark water. "He said the Mandarin lives. You realize what that means, don't you?" "That someone else now wears the mask," said Tommy. "Someone who knows we exist." Tuppence smiled faintly. "Well, that should make tomorrow morning interesting." They walked back toward the waiting car, their silhouettes swallowed by mist. As they reached the embankment, the faint sound of a bell drifted across the river. One, then two tolls, like a warning whispered through the fog. Tommy paused, his hand on the car door. "You know, Tuppence," he said quietly, "when this began, I thought we were chasing a file. Now I think the file was chasing us." She met his eyes, her tone light but her expression solemn. "Then we'd better learn how to run faster." He smiled, started the engine, and drove into the night. Behind them, the river carried its secrets downstream, Renfrew's body perhaps, or the Mandarin's shadow, toward the waiting sea. And in the cabin of the empty barge, the broken lamp flickered once more, then went out completely, leaving only darkness, and the faint echo of laughter that might have been carried on the tide. The summons arrived in the Morning Post, typed on paper so ordinary it felt suspicious. "Mr. and Mrs. Beresford," Tommy read aloud, his tone wry. "Your attendance is requested at 12 o'clock noon, Office 7B, Whitehall Annex. Confidential." Tuppence looked up from buttering her toast. "Requested, not invited. How charmingly vague. I suppose we're to bring our own blindfolds." Tommy folded the letter carefully. At least they didn't include the words, "Don't make a scene." That's usually implied. She smiled thinly. "I shall wear my quietest hat." The building was one of those that London specialises in. Grey, discreet and anonymous, as though designed by someone allergic to imagination. Inside, the air smelled of dust, typewriter oil, and the sort of secrets that never quite die. A secretary led them down a corridor lined with doors marked only by numbers. When she stopped at 7B, she opened it silently and gestured them inside. The room was sparse. One desk, two chairs, and a man in a grey suit that matched both his walls and his expression. He rose politely. "Mr. and Mrs. Beresford, thank you for coming." His voice was even, his manner perfectly ordinary. Only the eyes betrayed him, cool, assessing, the colour of wet slate. Mr. Gray, said Tommy, shaking his hand, or is that a convenient label for the day? The man's mouth curved faintly. We find names overrated in my profession. Of course you do, said Tuppence. They lead to accountability. Mr. Gray regarded her with the mild amusement of a man who doesn't have to explain himself. You've caused rather a stir. The Shanghai mission was buried long ago. Digging it up again has complicated matters. Complicated, Tommy echoed, a polite word for embarrassing. Indeed, said Gray. The government appreciates your patriotic curiosity, of course, but there are limits to what private citizens should handle. Classified materials, for instance. His eyes shifted toward Tuppence's handbag. She smiled. Do all your meetings end with someone asking to see a lady's belongings? He ignored the remark. The photograph. I'm told you still have it. Possibly, she said. Why do you ask? Gray folded his hands. Because it's evidence of an operation that never officially existed, featuring people who were never officially born, working for a department that has since been renamed and reburied. Keeping it is not advisable. Tommy leaned back in his chair. You mean inconvenient? Gray's gaze flicked to him, then back to Tuppence. You've both done valuable work in the past. It would be unfortunate if this enthusiasm led you into territory better left alone. Tuppence tilted her head. Unfortunate in what way? There was the smallest pause. Administrative, he said smoothly. One might find doors closing, passports delayed, invitations lost. Tuppence's eyes sparkled. How terribly British. Threat served with a cup of civility. Gray allowed himself the faintest smile. You must understand, when wars end, ghosts remain. Some are patriotic, others are simply inconvenient. Tuppence's tone was cool. And which are we? That, said Gray, depends on what you do next. He rose, signalling the meeting was over. The Mandarin matter is concluded. The Renfrew incident will not appear in any record. We suggest you return to your quieter pursuits. Tommy stood, adjusting his hat. I see. And if we don't? Gray opened the door for them. Then I expect we shall meet again, though not as cordially. Outside, the corridor seemed colder. They walked in silence until they reached the street, the noise of traffic oddly jarring after the stillness of the building. Tuppence stopped beneath a lamppost and looked up at the blank facade of Whitehall Annex. You know, she said, I rather miss the days when villains twirled their moustaches. At least you knew where you stood. Tommy exhaled slowly. He's not a villain exactly. He's the man who cleans up after them, and occasionally decides the broom looks too much like a sword. Same difference, she said. They crossed towards St. James's Park, where the autumn wind stirred the trees. Tuppence sat on a bench, removing her gloves one finger at a time. He knows about the photograph, she said, which means someone at the Foreign Office told him, and that means our flat isn't as private as we thought. Tommy nodded. Then we'll have to assume they're watching. I do hope they enjoy our breakfast conversations, she said dryly. We're very witty in the mornings. He glanced sideways at her. What are you thinking? That we keep the photograph, she said firmly. If Mr. Gray wants it that badly, it's worth more than he's admitting. Tommy hesitated. You're sure? He wasn't bluffing about the consequences. Tuppence gave a small, dangerous smile. Tommy dear, when a man that colour tells you not to look at something, you can be certain it's fascinating. He laughed softly. I can't argue with that logic. Besides, she added, Gray made one mistake. Oh? She turned to face him, her expression sharp. He assumed we were frightened. We're not. We're curious. That evening, back at South Audley Mansions, the flat was warm and calm. Fritz's cat from next door had wandered in and was dozing on the sofa, oblivious to intrigue. Tuppence sat at her writing desk, the photograph lying before her under the lamp. The figures stared back. Uniforms, faces half smiling, the ghosts of Shanghai. And there, near the edge, the woman who looked like her. She touched the corner of the print thoughtfully. You know, Tommy, there's something odd about this image. Look at the shadow behind the woman. See how it falls. It doesn't match the light on the others. She was added later. Tommy leaned over her shoulder. A composite? Yes. Someone wanted her there, to suggest she was part of the original team. He frowned. To what end? She looked up at him. To blur the line between her and me. He gave a short whistle. So the decoy theory stands. More than that, Tuppence said softly. If someone altered this photo, it was done by professionals, which means our Mr. Grey already knows she never existed. Tommy met her gaze. Then why ask for it? Because he's frightened of what it might reveal. Not about her, but about him. The clock on the mantel ticked softly. The city outside murmured with distant life, the rumble of buses, the clatter of a milk cart far down the street. Tuppence turned off the lamp, tucking the photograph back into its envelope. We'll keep it hidden, somewhere even we forget for a while. Tommy smiled faintly. A bit of counter-espionage in our retirement years. Exactly, she said. If the ghosts of Shanghai insist on haunting us, the least we can do is make them work for it. He reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. You know, you were magnificent in there today. Was I? Completely unyielding. Mr. Grey looked like a man trying to reason with a hurricane. Tuppence laughed softly. Good. Perhaps it will blow him somewhere less comfortable. As they prepared for bed, she paused by the window, looking out across the rooftops. The lights of London shimmered faintly through the night haze. Tommy, she said quietly, do you ever think we've outlived our time? He joined her at the window. No, I think our time simply refuses to stop following us. She smiled. Then let it. I should hate to be forgotten. He kissed her cheek lightly. Impossible. Below, a car engine started, a faint, lingering sound that drifted through the quiet street before fading away. Tuppence closed the curtains. Grey, she murmured. He'll try again. Tommy nodded. Then he'll find we're not as harmless as we look. She smiled to herself as she turned out the light. He already knows that. That's why he called us ghosts. The darkness settled around them, peaceful yet alert. Somewhere beyond, in an office with no name, Mr. Grey was no doubt writing his report, tidy, bloodless, and wrong. And on the Beresfords' mantel, the photograph lay hidden behind the clock, its faces waiting patiently for the day someone dared to look too closely again. It was a soft afternoon in London, the sort that blurs the edges of things. The kettle hummed, the clock ticked, and South Audley Mansions seemed, for once, at peace. Tommy sat by the window, newspaper in hand, pretending to read. Tuppence was at the table, the photograph once again spread before her beneath the glow of the desk lamp. She had studied it a dozen times since their meeting with Mr. Grey, yet something had continued to whisper at her from its glossy surface, something she couldn't name. "Tommy," she said suddenly, "come here." He folded the paper, mildly wary. "You've got that tone again, the one that suggests either brilliance or domestic upheaval." "Brilliance," she said firmly. "Sit." He joined her at the table. The photo, enlarged slightly, was pinned at its corners by teacups. Around the small group of men and women, agents of a mission long buried, the light caught the faint sheen of the paper. "Look at the edge," said Tuppence, pointing. "Here, just beyond the woman who looks like me." Tommy squinted. "What am I meant to see?" "The reflection," she whispered, "in the glass window behind them." He leaned closer, eyes narrowing. "Well, I'll be—" The faint outline of a man stood there, barely discernible in the shine of the photograph. His face was lost to glare, but his silhouette was unmistakable. In one hand he held a cane, a heavy, distinctive walking stick carved with a serpent's head. "Finlay," Tommy breathed. "Yes," said Tuppence softly. "He wasn't just supervising from London. He was there. He led the mission." They sat in silence for a moment, listening to the clock tick. "All this time," Tommy said slowly, "we thought he was covering something corrupt. But the gold shipments, they weren't stolen funds. They were used." Tuppence nodded. "To save people, refugees, informants, families, smuggled out of Shanghai under diplomatic cover. Finlay turned the Mandarin's operation against him." "And paid for it ever since," Tommy added quietly, haunted by the ghosts of his own good deed. She smiled faintly. "How very British, to commit heroism as if it were a crime." Tommy leaned back, exhaling. "So that's the truth then. The Mandarin wasn't a man. It was a shadow everyone used. Finlay, Renfrew, even Grey. And somewhere along the way, the truth got lost in the filing cabinets." Tuppence looked at the photograph again. Not lost. Hidden, because it was kinder that way. He frowned. Kinda? Yes, she said simply. If Gray or his sort ever discovered what Finley really did, they'd twist it. Call it treason, cover-up, misappropriation of funds. They'd bury his honor under bureaucracy. She traced the faint reflection with her fingertip. He saved lives, Tommy. That's what mattered. He studied her face, the gentleness behind her resolve. You're thinking of letting it go. I am, she said. For once in our lives, perhaps we leave a secret alone. He gave a slow, thoughtful nod. We've had enough adventures for 2 lifetimes. Maybe one mystery can stay unsolved. Officially, at least. She smiled. Unofficially, of course. I shall gloat about it whenever the mood strikes. They spent the afternoon in quiet tasks. Tommy made tea, though he forgot the sugar, and Tuppence tidied the papers that had once consumed their every waking hour. When she finished, she placed the photograph in a small envelope and sealed it carefully. What will you do with it? Tommy asked. She considered. Not the fire. Too final. And not the post. They'd only lose it on purpose. No, I think it belongs somewhere safe, somewhere it can breathe quietly. She rose, crossed to the mantel, and slipped the envelope behind the framed wedding photograph of them taken just after the war. There, she said, between one beginning and another. Tommy smiled. Symbolic as ever. Practical as well, she replied. No one ever looks behind sentiment. Evening came softly, the light turning gold across the floorboards. The radio played a slow tune from the next flat, something wistful and half-forgotten. Tommy poured 2 glasses of sherry. So, Mrs. Beresford, how does it feel to sit on a state secret? Comfortable, she said, taking her glass. And besides, it's not really a secret anymore. It's a story. He lifted an eyebrow. And how do we tell it? We don't, she said gently. Some stories are meant to be whispered, not written. Tommy chuckled. That should be our family motto. It already is, she replied. You just never noticed. They clinked glasses. For a moment neither spoke, content to let the quiet hold them. The city murmured outside, the last light fading into the soft pulse of lamps and footsteps. Tuppence set her glass down and turned back to the window. Do you suppose Finley knew before he died that someone would finally understand? I hope so, said Tommy. If not, we'll remember for him. She nodded. Yes, that seems fair. After a while she smiled a little sadly. You know, it's strange. We started this because of a misdelivered letter, a bit of curiosity at breakfast, and now it's finished because of a photograph that doesn't belong to anyone anymore. He slipped an arm around her shoulders. It belongs to both of us, like every impossible thing we've ever stumbled into. Tuppence leaned against him, resting her head lightly on his shoulder. I suppose that's true. We never did learn when to leave well enough alone. And I hope we never do, said Tommy quietly. The clock struck 7. In the soft chime of it, the photograph on the mantel caught the fading light one last time, glimmering faintly as though acknowledging its keepers. Tuppence looked up at it and smiled. You see, Tommy, honour isn't about being remembered. It's about deserving to be, even when no one ever knows. He nodded. Finley would approve of that. And perhaps, she said, so would the Mandarin, whoever he was. Every legend needs a villain to disguise its heroes. Tommy raised his glass in a small toast, to the ghosts of Shanghai. Tuppence raised hers in answer. And to the living fools who still listen when ghosts whisper. They drank, and the moment passed into quiet. Outside, London carried on, oblivious, untroubled, eternal. The street lamps flickered on, one by one, and the Beresfords' window glowed warm against the dusk, and behind the clock on the mantel, between shadow and glass, a single photograph rested in peace, its truth intact, its secret safe, its story hidden not by MI6 but by choice.